Greetings, shippers. It's time to tackle a less fun topic. It's time to talk about toxic fandom. Now, for anyone hoping that this is just going to be a bash fest of certain fandoms, that's not what this is. This is going to be a general look at what exactly a toxic fandom is. So if you're here just hoping to hear about a fandom that's been particularly frustrating to you get bashed, that is not this. We will be analyzing certain fandoms that have been deemed toxic in greater detail because it's interesting to see exactly what people find toxic about them, as it varies from fandom to fandom. Each instance is actually very unique. And as we will discover, one instance does not necessarily mean that the entirety of a fandom is toxic. Before we jump into it, I just wanted to mention that there was some actual interest in Wonder Cream from the last video, that being the crack ship of Wonder Woman x Ice Cream. Some people actually said they were going to create some fan art or fanfics for it. If you do, please send them my way. Use the social media that I have that I always forget to plug, the Twitter, Shippers Guide, and the Facebook as well. Or email me. Send it my way somehow and I will feature it in a future video. We can make Wonder Cream happen. This isn't going to be Tony Stark x Jessica Jones all over again. I won't let it. So since we're about to discuss such a negative topic, let's be mindful and attempt to keep the comments a positive place. While this topic is a very heated and controversial one for some, it is important to remember that it is possible to have debates and differing opinions and still be respectful of one another. So with all of that being said, let's get into it and define toxic fandom. Toxic fandom is a term that has been making the rounds for a while at the time of this recording, as adding toxic to concepts to define them is currently in vogue. However, toxic fandoms have existed long before this was the term used to define them. Nevertheless, there are some who wonder just what exactly are they? For no matter how prevalent they can feel to those who have crossed their path, there are certain lucky individuals who have never encountered one. So sit back as we attempt to define just what exactly is a toxic fandom. Well, at its core, a toxic fandom is a fandom that has been overrun with negativity to the point where the public perception of it as a whole is negative, even if the negativity is confined to a certain segment of the fandom. Shipping is sadly a good example of toxic fandom, as shipping can often get out of control while the rest of a fandom remains relatively drama-free. Though even if shipping is sometimes the origin of such negativity, that is not to say the negativity must remain in whatever corner of fandom it originates from. The larger the reach of the harassment, bullying, and other negative behavior, the more toxic the fandom. For example, Voltron has a reputation for having quite a toxic shipping culture, and even those who are not involved can find themselves sucked in by those who do not appreciate that they like a certain character or have a different point of view, or do not support the dominant pairing. Even if they are not overly active in the fandom, they may be sought out and harassed. Steven Universe also has a negative reputation when it comes to receiving alternate representations in fan art, to the point where some are afraid to post their depictions for fear of others targeting their work, as it does not fit with what they feel the show's dominant paradigm represents. Although some feel that the Steven Universe fandom is currently calming down. In short, there are different ways a fandom can be toxic, and different levels of toxicity, but the behaviors tend to be the same. Namely, bullying, such as bombarding an individual with threats and encouraging others to do the same. Exposing members to public ridicule, attempting to blackmail individuals on a creative staff, attempting to justify real-world political positions by using works of fiction or art as negative examples and vilifying the creators or other fans, posting horrifying images of gore or sexual violence in response to a post one does not like, harassing the real-world significant others of cast and crew, and the list sadly goes on. With all of this being said, how does one know when one is a part of a toxic fandom? While it can in many cases be obvious, especially if incidents are frequent. However, it is possible to be in a fandom where all the above is occurring and be unaware of such activity. So how does one who is, say, more on the fringes come to the realization that their fandom may be toxic? Well, the fandom in question may begin to garner a negative reputation for being overly intense or rude or arrogant. However, if a fandom is truly toxic, it is unlikely one will be able to avoid the negative behaviors forever, especially if they begin to get more involved in the fandom. These types of interactions may lead to fandom becoming stressful, which is the best indicator of whether or not a fandom is toxic. Are members being driven away / approaching the community with feelings of fear and apprehension, or just not approaching it at all? If so, then one is most likely a member of a toxic fandom. Although it must be noted that everyone's threshold for conflict is different, so for some it may take more or less adverse encounters before they feel the fandom is toxic. The perception of others outside the fandom is a good gauge for this, as when one is engaged in a community, it can be more difficult to take a step back and examine the behavior of the group as a whole. As mentioned earlier, it is possible that only one segment of the fandom is toxic. For argument's sake, let's let's use a ship, where a shipping war has gotten totally out of control as an example. Does that make the whole fandom toxic? The answer is potentially yes and no. Yes, if one is only engaged in that segment of the fandom and there are no communities that are free of such behavior. However, if one is, say, a theorist rather than a shipper, then it is possible they will encounter less vitriol and be less bothered by it. Although that is no guarantee depending on how aggressive the fandom, as it is possible for the toxic segments of fandom to attempt to assimilate the healthy parts by spreading their philosophies into segments that have nothing to do with, say, their pairing. It is these aggressive groups who can render a fandom the most toxic, and can at times garner a group mainstream notoriety, creating the impression that they are the entirety of the fandom, an impression that can for some become a self-fulfilling prophecy. However, fear not, for no fandom is toxic forever. This is because of the very structure of fandom and fans within a community. At some point, any given work will end, and at that point, certain fans will fall off over time, leaving only the most dedicated in their wake. And the most dedicated tend not to have been those championing behavior that harmed communities, though there are of course exceptions. And the most diehard fans may themselves have been members of parts of the community that were in fact toxic even if they were not. Or they may themselves have been toxic but have mellowed over time. However, this detoxification process can even manifest while a work is ongoing, as sometimes there can be a burst of anger over one incident that quickly fades. However, the ripple effects of that incident can last longer than whatever occurred. Fading in general transpires because for many fans, the passion they feel towards a ship or idea is fueled by the immediacy of the product. Once the work becomes less current and no more or less is being produced for it and all canons and outcomes are set, for many, interest wanes, and for many except those involved, the battles are forgotten, with only screen caps and comments left as proof that anything ever happened at all. So why does this occur at all? What causes certain people to behave this way? How do things go from molehill to mountain? Well, to this question there are many answers, and here are just a few. Some are simply trolls, attempting to stir up trouble and ruin the enjoyment of others as a source of their own entertainment. Some are genuine and become caught up in their ship/idea and surround themselves with like-minded people, shutting out dissenters until the ideas become more and more extreme, and eventually any action taken within this group is viewed as normal or justified in a sort of online manifestation of mob mentality. Much of this and what follows seems to stem from a sense of entitlement. Then there are those who are self-righteous, who believe they are crusading for moral justice with their ship or opinion. Youth can also play a factor, as younger individuals tend to be more passionate and think through their ideas and execution of them less. However, this is not a rule, as adults can be quite heavy contributors to toxic fandom. Some also feel that the more progressive a work is, the more toxic its fandom has the potential to become, as people will feel the need to defend what they view as the integrity of the piece. However, everyone has different ideas as to where that benchmark is, and intent can be hard to gauge, especially in an online culture. As a result, attempts to be positive can twist into negativity and bullying rather rapidly, especially as there are some who believe that intent does not matter, creating ironic situations wherein works preaching tolerance have surprisingly intolerant portions of their own fandom. A phenomenon that seems to happen disproportionately with children's programming. And like with most fandom toxicity, few can seem to agree on the source, though there are in some instances clear culprits. So with all of these factors, what can one do about toxic fandom? Well, to be honest, not much. If one is non-confrontational, it is most likely best not to engage. However, these fandoms by their very definition make it difficult to avoid engaging. For some, avoidance is their only option, and they simply enjoy their fandom from a distance. However, it is at times possible to find spaces within fandoms that are untouched oases on the internet, or at times in person amongst friends where one can enjoy their fandom unaccosted. For some, they work to create such spaces and have no qualms about banning harassers. Behavior which, if done correctly, is quite helpful. However, given people's differing levels of sensitivity, the bans can at times become tyrannical. However, it must be noted there is nothing wrong with banning a genuine bully or megatroll, especially if they are completely disrupting the experience for everyone else. It can simply at times become difficult to know the difference, though there are some who feel that this reaction is never appropriate. So does toxicity itself ruin fandoms? Well, the answer is yes and no. While it is rare for the entirety of a fandom to be poisoned, toxicity can ruin fandoms for individuals or even an entire group of, say, an opposing ship as an example. It can also ruin the public's perception of a fan community, which can give potential new members pause and turn some people away altogether. Every fandom has its share of negativity, from bigots, the overenthusiastic, the overinvested, and the like, but toxic fandom is something else entirely. In short, when communication becomes impossible and this kind of interaction begins to overrun a fandom or certain segments of it. Like a rotten apple, such behavior can very quickly spread. Though this does not happen in all fandoms, hence toxicity will not ruin all fandoms, but has a strong potential to do so, even if, as mentioned, it is not permanent. Some wonder if fandom is more toxic today than when it started, that being the more traditional sense of fandom that people have become familiar with that began its genesis in the 1960s. Many fans stating they feel they have seen a shift in the years they have participated. One must examine that statement closely, as it is quite common for the older generation to view events as on a downward spiral. However, it does seem like talk of toxicity has increased since the mid-2000s. Are people more toxic, or is this another case of the increase in the public's ability to share and produce content, creating spaces to express sentiments that were already in place but had no outlet? The rise of the internet and then social media makes sharing one's opinions, be they pleasure, outrage, or distaste, startlingly easy, and also increases the ease and speed around which one can organize around such sentiments. As a result, incidents that would once have been small and contained can balloon into mountains that are seen by a wide range of people, members of the fandom and those outside. In this way, the ability to be toxic has definitely increased, as has the ability for such incidents to be seen. But as for the sentiments being more intense, that is difficult to gauge. Fandoms have always had segments that are overly invested and fans that go too far. However, what it is that pushes them to the point of lashing out may have changed due to ever-shifting values and politics that make up the social landscape. Although the tendency for one to conflate one's own self-identity with what one enjoys can be a recipe for overinvestment. It must also be noted that all of these things vary from region to region and based upon a fan's subject positioning. However, this increase in the ability to voice one's opinion and share is a double-edged sword. For just as some would argue fandom has grown more intolerant and hostile, there are those who would argue the exact opposite. For just as it has become easier to spread negativity, it has also become easier to spread positivity. For every angry hate blog, there is also a place for love, multi-shipping, works of art, inspiration, and charity. People can also organize and mobilize in positive ways, and can actively seek to counteract the activity done by those who are toxic. Fandom is more alive than ever, and there are many people seeking to do positive things with it, so it must not be thought that all is doom and gloom. Both of these actions can be occurring within the very same fandom at the same time. Basically, fandom toxicity is as varied as the fandoms it inhabits, and every toxic fandom has a slightly different story, and everyone will claim that a different one is the most toxic for a variety of reasons. There are, however, some standouts that people will note at the time of this recording. Some of those include Voltron, Undertale, Dream Daddy, Steven Universe, Super Hulock, and there are many, many more. We will get into some of these individual fandoms to see what exactly it is about them that has made them toxic. Not as an attempt to bash them or say that they are less than, because all of these fandoms have extremely positive segments as well, but simply as an examination of what exactly happened and why. As for toxic fandom in general, some people do throw this label around, branding an entire fandom as putrid after seeing only one or two instances, which can be a disservice as it hyperbolizes things and can trivialize fandoms where much worse is occurring. However, as was mentioned, people have different gauges for this, but at the center of it, toxicity makes a fandom stressful and unenjoyable for a large number of those within it, oftentimes in a coordinated manner, with the toxicity often being for reasons that usually do not hold up under intense scrutiny, though there are some rare exceptions. In some circles, even talking about this at all is taboo, as no one wants to make a subculture that is so small appear even worse, as fandom and shipping does not have the best reputation with the public. At worst, it is viewed negatively, and by most, it is still viewed with a sense of confusion. However, one cannot just sweep things under the rug to keep up appearances. Toxicity is unfortunately a part of fandom, and most likely always will be. The question is how much, and what are people attempting to do to make their spaces more positive. It is also important to examine oneself and see if one is adding to the positive or negative experience of a fandom. Hopefully that definition helped out for those who were wondering. Also, hopefully no one does a toxic counter for this video, because the word was said quite a few times. There simply isn't a synonym for toxic that has the same punch. So I'll ask the question, what do you guys do when you encounter toxic fandom? And so we don't end it on a downbeat note, what are some of the best experiences you've had in fandom? Because there is always good to be had. And if that isn't enough to cheer you up, come on. Pokemon shirt, Pokemon shirt, Pokemon shirt. This has been Shipper's Guide to the Galaxy. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Special thanks to all my patrons for helping make this possible. Check out social media and Patreon to stay up to date, and as always, stay tuned, for there are as many ships out there as there are stars in the sky.